The wind curled through the auction yard like a warning, picking up dust that stung eyes and choked lungs. It tugged at the wide-brimmed hats of ranchers leaning against sun-bleached fence rails and carried the sharp scent of sweat, manure, and rusted iron through the dry June air. People moved slowly, deliberately, as if they had all the time in the world to decide which lives were worth buying and which could be forgotten. Claire didn't move slowly. Her steps were brisk but unsure, her eyes sweeping across the holding pens with the unease of someone both searching and afraid of what they might find. Her jeans were worn at the knees, the right one mended with blue thread that didn't quite match. Her boots had once been red, maybe. Now they were the color of survival, scuffed, dusty, and silent. She clutched a folded $50 bill in her palm, fingers clammy. It was all she had. Not just for the auction. For the week. Maybe for the month. The gate screeched open, and another horse was led into the ring. A proud gelding with a gleaming chestnut coat and a measured gait. The auctioneer's voice rose like a whip crack. "Startin' at 500. 500. Look at the posture on this boy." Claire's gaze drifted to the back corner of the yard, where no one was looking. A sun-warped sign reading, "Cull Pen," hung crooked on a bent post. That's where they put the ones too sick, too old, or too broken to bother showing. She swallowed hard, adjusting the canvas strap of the feed bag slung over her shoulder. She didn't belong here. Not anymore. 3 years ago, she'd been a regular, a rescue license in her pocket, her own little patch of pasture south of town, and a trailer always hitched to her truck. She'd pulled out horses whose eyes had already gone dim and brought them back, one hoof step at a time. But one storm, one overdue mortgage, and one failed transmission later, it had all crumbled. The trailer was gone. The pasture had turned to someone else's investment property. The only thing she still had was the part of her heart that didn't know how to give up. And $50. She didn't come to buy. She came to remind herself what the end looked like. To remember why it had hurt so much to walk away. Closure, maybe. Or punishment. She wasn't sure which. Then she saw it. Collapsed in the farthest corner of the Cull Pen was what might have once been a horse. Mud-crusted. Bones like sharpened fence posts beneath torn skin. Its ears were pressed flat, its sides unmoving. A man nearby muttered, "That thing's a corpse. They should have left it in the field." Claire stared. She couldn't look away. The mare, no, stallion, barely, was the color of old ash. Black mane matted with dried sweat and burrs. One leg was folded under him at a strange angle. A wound near his flank had festered, the hair around it patchy. But it wasn't the injuries that caught her breath. It was the eye. Just one, barely open. Glazed but watching. Not pleading. Not expecting. Just enduring. Like he knew hope was too expensive to afford. Claire's throat tightened. Her hand clenched around the 50 like it might disappear. Behind her, the auctioneer's voice blurred into a background hum. Bidding continued. Laughter. Spit hitting gravel. She stepped forward. It was like walking into a silence no one else heard. Claire ducked under the loose chain of the Cull Pen and knelt by the horse. He didn't flinch. She reached out slowly, touching the side of his neck. The skin twitched beneath her fingers. "Hey," she whispered. "You still in there?" A shiver ran through him. Barely a tremor, but it answered her. She stayed there for what might have been a minute or a lifetime. Dust blew past, and the world moved on around them. Biddings closed on the next round, the auctioneer called. Cull Pen opens in 5. Claire stood, brushed her hands on her jeans, and walked straight to the auctioneer's trailer. 50, she said. The man blinked. What? That black stallion. Cull Pen. You were gonna put him on the truck. He scratched his stubbled chin. He ain't worth the bullets to put him down. You can't even ride him to the back of the trailer. 50, she repeated. Cash. Now. He looked at her boots, her hollow cheeks, the crack in her voice. Then shrugged. He's yours. But don't say I didn't warn you. That one's just bones and regret. The bill changed hands. Claire didn't look back. A friend from town, Cora, had loaned her an old 2-horse trailer for the day, on the condition that Claire bring it back clean and don't ask to borrow it again. She backed it up to the coal pen, teeth gritted, arms trembling. The stallion hadn't moved. She opened the gate, stepped inside, and knelt again. "Come on, boy," she murmured, pouring a palmful of soaked oats from her bag. "Just a little farther. We're not done yet." It took nearly an hour. She didn't lead him. She didn't push. She waited, whispered. Let him sniff the trail of feed she left inch by inch. His legs shook when he tried to rise. He collapsed twice. On the third try, he managed to stand, barely. Claire held her breath the entire time. Gasps echoed from a few onlookers who'd paused to watch. One teenage boy asked his dad, "Why's she doing that?" The man shrugged. "Some people don't know when to quit." By the time she got him loaded, Claire's shirt was soaked through with sweat and tears she hadn't noticed falling. She latched the trailer door with trembling fingers. On the drive back to the edge of town, she kept glancing in the side mirror. She half expected to see the trailer empty, or worse, still. But each time, she caught a glimpse of the black mane fluttering. Alive. Barely. But alive. She pulled into the old dairy barn just outside the town limits, a leaning structure loaned by a distant uncle of a friend who'd long since stopped checking in. The boards groaned, the roof leaked in 3 places, and the only stall that still closed was the one nearest the door. She backed the trailer with slow, halting precision. Opened the ramp. Unlatched the chain. The stallion didn't move. Claire climbed inside again, this time with a bowl of water and a handful of feed softened in warm milk. She sat beside him. Waited. "I don't know your name," she whispered. "But I figure if you've made it this far, you deserve one." She thought for a long while. Her fingers combed gently through the knot of his forelock, dislodging burrs. "Chance," she said at last. "You don't look like much, but neither do I." His ear twitched toward her. She smiled. It was small, fragile, but real. The sun dipped low behind the hills, casting golden stripes across the cracked wooden slats. Dust hung suspended in beams of light like stardust. She fed him from her hands, drop by drop. When he swallowed the last, she leaned her forehead against his neck and closed her eyes. Outside, the world buzzed with judgments and headlines. Inside the stall, there was only the sound of breath, hers and his, still coming, still fighting, still here. And somehow, against all reason, not alone. Claire awoke on the floor of the barn with a stiff neck and straw tangled in her hair. Her cheek had been pressed against the coarse grain of the stall wall for who knew how long. She blinked against the dimness, listening. The familiar creaks of the old beams whispered overhead. Then came the softest sound, a hoof dragging, gently, across dirt. She sat up. Chance had shifted. Only slightly, but enough to kick up a puff of dust beneath him. His chest still rose and fell, unevenly, but steady. The night hadn't taken him. Claire exhaled like she'd been holding her breath since yesterday. She leaned forward and checked the small basin of water beside him. Half empty. The oats she'd soaked were untouched, but he'd at least sniffed them. There were marks from his nostrils in the slop. She reached out and ran her fingers lightly along his shoulder, avoiding the worst of the sores. His skin twitched, reacting to her touch. A small sign, but meaningful. "You stubborn old boy," she murmured. The sun had not yet cleared the hills, but light seeped into the cracks in the barn siding, illuminating dust motes like gold flecks in the air. Claire took that as her cue. She stood slowly, stretching aching limbs, and stepped outside. A rooster crowed somewhere down the hill, sounding more irritated than triumphant. Claire walked stiffly to the pump behind the barn and cranked the handle until rusty water splashed into her bucket. It was heavy as she carried it back, her arms trembling before she reached the door. She didn't mind. The ache in her muscles felt honest. Inside, Chance remained where she'd left him, but his ears flicked toward the sound of her footsteps. She knelt beside him again, wetting a rag with the pump water and gently dabbing the crusted wound on his flank. It smelled worse today. Infection had clearly set in. She'd need antibiotics, and not the cheap kind. Stuff like this didn't heal with good intentions and warm rags. She bit her lip and tried not to let panic set in. "Give me a little time, okay?" she whispered. "I'll figure it out." The sun was fully up by the time she finished the cleaning. Claire poured a small pile of feed just a few inches from his mouth and stood back. She watched as Chance tilted his head slightly, lips moving. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, he took a bite. Claire's knees buckled and she sat down hard in the straw, laughing softly. Relief made her dizzy. She didn't need him to stand. Not today. She just needed him to want to. She left the barn reluctantly, locking the stall behind her even though there was no way he was going anywhere. She drove the borrowed truck down into town, parked behind the diner where she worked part-time, and slipped through the back door. It was the kind of place that served truckers at sunrise and locals at midnight. Chrome counters, peeling booths, coffee as thick as engine oil. Claire tied on her apron and clocked in 5 minutes late. "Mornin'," said Dell, the fry cook, with a sideways glance. He was 55, covered in grease, and sharp as a cleaver. "You look like you slept in a hay bale." "I did," she muttered, pulling her hair back. "More or less." He raised an eyebrow but said nothing else. Claire appreciated that about him. She worked her shift like she always did, refilling coffees, slapping down orders, keeping her head low. But her mind was far from the smell of bacon and syrup. She kept seeing Chance's eyes, the faint twitch of his ears, the way he'd nibbled at the oats. After her shift ended, she didn't go home. She stopped by the feed store. Claire. The owner, Martha, looked up from the register, brows knitting. "Haven't seen you in months." "Yeah," Claire said, trying to smile. "I need some meds. Antibiotics. For infection. Big wound. Deep." Martha nodded slowly. "You back in the game?" "Something like that." Martha hesitated, then reached beneath the counter. "I've got a couple bottles near expiry I can part with cheap. You'll have to keep them cold." "I've got a cooler." She did not. But she'd find one. Back at the barn, the air had warmed to a slow burn. Cicadas hummed in the trees. Inside, it was still and stifling. Chance lifted his head when she walked in. It wasn't much, but it was deliberate. Claire administered the meds with careful hands, speaking softly, steadily. Her father used to say it wasn't the medicine that healed, it was the hands that gave it. That a creature needed to trust you before it let you save it. She wasn't sure if she believed that now, but it made her hands gentler. That night, she stayed again. She curled in a corner of the stall on an old horse blanket, one eye always watching him. At some point, she must have drifted, because she jolted awake to the sound of a hoof scraping concrete. Claire awoke on the floor of the barn with a stiff neck and straw tangled in her hair. Her cheek had been pressed against the coarse grain of the stall wall for who knew how long. She blinked against the dimness, listening. The familiar creaks of the old beams whispered overhead. Then came the softest sound, a hoof dragging, gently, across dirt. She sat up. Chance had shifted. Only slightly, but enough to kick up a puff of dust beneath him. His chest still rose and fell, unevenly, but steady. The night hadn't taken him. Claire exhaled like she'd been holding her breath since yesterday. She leaned forward and checked the small basin of water beside him. Half empty. The oats she'd soaked were untouched, but he'd at least sniffed them. There were marks from his nostrils in the slop. She reached out and ran her fingers lightly along his shoulder, avoiding the worst of the sores. His skin twitched, reacting to her touch. A small sign, but meaningful. "You stubborn old boy," she murmured. The sun had not yet cleared the hills, but light seeped into the cracks in the barn siding, illuminating dust motes like gold flecks in the air. Claire took that as her cue. She stood slowly, stretching aching limbs, and stepped outside. A rooster crowed somewhere down the hill, sounding more irritated than triumphant. Claire walked stiffly to the pump behind the barn and cranked the handle until rusty water splashed into her bucket. It was heavy as she carried it back, her arms trembling before she reached the door. She didn't mind. The ache in her muscles felt honest. Inside, Chance remained where she'd left him, but his ears flicked toward the sound of her footsteps. She knelt beside him again, wetting a rag with the pump water and gently dabbing the crusted wound on his flank. It smelled worse today. Infection had clearly set in. She'd need antibiotics, and not the cheap kind. Stuff like this didn't heal with good intentions and warm rags. She bit her lip and tried not to let panic set in. "Give me a little time, okay?" she whispered. "I'll figure it out." The sun was fully up by the time she finished the cleaning. Claire poured a small pile of feed just a few inches from his mouth and stood back. She watched as Chance tilted his head slightly, lips moving. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, he took a bite. Claire's knees buckled and she sat down hard in the straw, laughing softly. Relief made her dizzy. She didn't need him to stand. Not today. She just needed him to want to. She left the barn reluctantly, locking the stall behind her even though there was no way he was going anywhere. She drove the borrowed truck down into town, parked behind the diner where she worked part-time, and slipped through the back door. It was the kind of place that served truckers at sunrise and locals at midnight. Chrome counters, peeling booths, coffee as thick as engine oil. Claire tied on her apron and clocked in 5 minutes late. "Mornin'," said Dell, the fry cook, with a sideways glance. He was 55, covered in grease, and sharp as a cleaver. "You look like you slept in a hay bale." "I did," she muttered, pulling her hair back. "More or less." He raised an eyebrow but said nothing else. Claire appreciated that about him. She worked her shift like she always did, refilling coffees, slapping down orders, keeping her head low. But her mind was far from the smell of bacon and syrup. She kept seeing Chance's eyes, the faint twitch of his ears, the way he'd nibbled at the oats. After her shift ended, she didn't go home. She stopped by the feed store. Claire. The owner, Martha, looked up from the register, brows knitting. "Haven't seen you in months." "Yeah," Claire said, trying to smile. "I need some meds. Antibiotics. For infection. Big wound. Deep." Martha nodded slowly. "You back in the game?" "Something like that." Martha hesitated, then reached beneath the counter. "I've got a couple bottles near expiry I can part with cheap. You'll have to keep them cold." "I've got a cooler." She did not. But she'd find one. Back at the barn, the air had warmed to a slow burn. Cicadas hummed in the trees. Inside, it was still and stifling. Chance lifted his head when she walked in. It wasn't much, but it was deliberate. Claire administered the meds with careful hands, speaking softly, steadily. Her father used to say it wasn't the medicine that healed, it was the hands that gave it. That a creature needed to trust you before it let you save it. She wasn't sure if she believed that now, but it made her hands gentler. That night, she stayed again. She curled in a corner of the stall on an old horse blanket, one eye always watching him. At some point, she must have drifted, because she jolted awake to the sound of a hoof scraping concrete. Chance was trying to stand. Claire froze. He braced his front legs, struggling. Twice he slipped back, groaning low in his throat. The third time, he made it halfway, panting heavily, legs quivering like saplings in a storm. "Come on," she whispered, tears stinging her eyes. "Come on, Chance." He stood, swaying, but up. She didn't dare move closer. Just watched him, heart full to the point of breaking. He took a step toward her, just one, and stopped. But it was enough. In the morning, Jesse showed up. He knocked once on the barn door before pushing it open, carrying a bag of farrier tools and 2 bales of hay on his shoulders. "You really did it," he said when he spotted Chance, still upright. Claire turned, bleary-eyed, hands coated in liniment. "You sound surprised. I figured he'd be dead by now. Thanks for the faith. I brought fresh hay. And Wormer. He's gonna need it." She stared at him, then nodded once. "You just here to drop things off?" "Nope." He set the bales down, dusted off his jeans, and stepped closer to the stall. "Figured I'd lend a hand. Been too long since I saw a horse beat the odds." Chance snorted, nostrils flaring at the unfamiliar scent. Claire watched Jessie approach him, slow and steady. The way Jessie spoke was different now, not to Claire, but to the horse. Low, coaxing, respectful. "He's still got some fight in him," Jessie said after a long moment. "You give him another week, and we'll see if he can bear weight." "He'll stand. He stood last night." Jessie grunted approval. "What's his name?" "Chance." Jessie scratched his chin. "Fitting." They fell into a quiet rhythm over the next few days. Jessie came in the mornings, checked Chance's hooves, administered Wormer, adjusted the ragged blanket Claire had scrounged from her trunk. Claire handled feeding, wound care, and stall cleaning. They didn't talk much, but the silence wasn't empty. Each day, Chance gained something: appetite, strength, light in his eye. He began to watch her when she moved. When she entered the stall, he'd flick his ears. By the 5th day, he nickered softly when she came in with his feed. One evening, Jessie lingered. "Didn't peg you for someone who'd throw everything away on a long shot," he said, leaning against the stall. Claire didn't look at him. "Wasn't a long shot. He just needed someone to show up." Jessie studied her, long and quiet. "You had anyone do that for you?" She hesitated. "Once. He died before I was old enough to thank him." "Your dad?" She nodded. "Mine was a drunk," Jessie said. "Didn't believe in anything but his own bad luck. I got lucky, had a horse once that gave me a reason to wake up every morning. Saved my life more than once." Claire looked at him then. "What happened to it?" "He got old. Couldn't move. Had to put him down myself." The silence that followed was heavier than before. "I'm sorry," she said. Jessie shrugged. "He went knowing he was loved. That's more than most." Claire turned back to Chance, who had begun dozing on his feet. "I just want to get him that far." "You will," Jessie said. "If he's got the will, and you've got the grit." She didn't answer, but the corner of her mouth twitched. As the week turned to 10 days, Chance took more steps. His coat, though still patchy, began to lose its dullness. The swelling around his wound diminished. He let Claire brush him now, gently, slowly, and even leaned into it sometimes. Jessie brought an old training halter. "If he keeps this up, might get him walking outside soon." Claire's eyes widened. "He's not ready. He's closer than you think." That night, Claire lay in the stall again, watching stars through the crack in the roof. Chance shifted beside her, breathing deeply. She reached out and rested her hand lightly on his shoulder. He didn't flinch. In the stillness, she whispered, "You keep trying, and I will too. Deal?" There was no sound but the night. And yet, she could feel it, his answer silent and sure. The morning sun painted the hills in warm hues of amber and gold, but the barn remained cool, shaded beneath its sagging roof. Claire stood at the threshold with a lead rope in hand, thumb tracing the frayed edges as her other hand absently toyed with the hem of her sleeve. She hadn't slept. Not well. The kind of sleep that left you more tired than when you closed your eyes. Chance was watching her. His ears twitched forward, curious but cautious. The stallion had gained weight in the last 3 weeks. Not much, but enough that the skeleton beneath his hide no longer looked like it might tear free at any moment. His wounds had scabbed and begun to fade into scars. His legs were steadier now. He moved with the slow grace of something learning its own body all over again. Today, she had to test him. Jessie leaned against the stall gate, arms folded, silent but present. He didn't offer advice right away. He'd learned Claire wasn't the kind to take direction unless it was earned. Claire clipped the lead rope to Chance's halter. He flinched slightly, but didn't shy away. She whispered to him like she always did, not cooing, not pleading. Just honest words in a low, steady tone. They stepped into the light together. The first few steps outside the stall were hesitant. His hooves, still tender despite regular cleaning and wraps, tested the barn's stone floor like it might collapse. Claire didn't tug. She let him walk at his own pace. Jessie opened the main barn doors wide, and the smell of fresh grass rolled in on a breeze that carried the scent of honeysuckle and earth. The moment Chance stepped into the sunlight, he stopped. His whole body froze, not in fear, but something else. His ears swiveled. His nostrils flared wide, breathing deep. Then, very gently, he let out a low, quiet nicker. Claire's throat closed. He remembered this. The meadow beyond the barn was nothing special. A bit of fenced-in pasture, overgrown in patches, dotted with wildflowers and clumps of weeds. But to Chance, it was open space. Freedom. Jessie murmured, "Let him go. See what he chooses." Claire hesitated. Her grip on the lead rope tightened for half a second before she unhooked it. Chance stood still, confused, looking from her to the open field. Then he stepped forward. Slow at first. Measured. And then, impossibly, he trotted. Claire watched, unable to move, as Chance's hooves struck the ground with uneven rhythm, one hind leg still weak, but holding. His tail lifted slightly, his head arched. He didn't go far, just a short loop around the edge of the pasture. But it was movement. It was choice. It was life. Jessie's voice was hushed. "Well, I'll be damned." Claire wiped her cheek, not realizing a tear had fallen. They didn't overdo it. She let him wander, supervised, for 15 minutes before leading him back into the stall. He was sweating and tired, but alert. Proud. That evening, at the diner, Claire couldn't focus. Plates came and went. Orders blurred. People spoke around her like she was underwater. The clink of silverware against plates, the low music on the jukebox, the scratch of pencil on check slips, all distant. During her break, she stepped outside into the alley behind the kitchen and leaned against the brick wall, inhaling the scent of fried onions and cigarette smoke. "You okay?" Dell asked, lighting a smoke. Claire shrugged. "Getting there." He blew a plume skyward. "You been working like someone chasing ghosts." Claire chuckled dryly. "Maybe I am." Dell didn't press. He never did. That was why she liked him. Before she returned to the barn, she stopped at the feed store again. Martha squinted at her over her glasses. "You look tired. But different. Lighter." Claire smiled faintly. "Chance walked today." Martha's eyes widened. "You mean the walking corpse from the coal pen?" Claire nodded. "Same one." "Damn." Martha reached below the counter and pulled out a flyer. "You might want to see this." Claire took it. Bright blue ink on thin paper. Rescue Rodeo, 1 day only, July 12th. Showcase your story. No competition. No pressure. Her hands tightened around the page. "They hold it every year," Martha said. "For folks who've taken in the lost causes. It ain't a contest. Just a chance to show what love can do." Claire studied the flyer a long moment. "Thanks." When she told Jessie the next morning, he didn't laugh. He just nodded. "Might do you both some good," he said. "Let people see him. I'm not sure he's ready." Jessie met her eyes. "Or maybe you're not." That stung more than she wanted to admit. They began a routine. Mornings in the pasture. Afternoons in the round pen. Jessie adjusted the footing with his own tools, raked out stones. Claire worked with Chance slowly, never pushing, just asking. Small circles. Halts. Turns. Chance responded better than she could have hoped. He was still stiff, still uncertain. But he wanted to please. He wanted to move. Claire found herself changing, too. She smiled more. She woke up with purpose. Her hands, once raw from labor, now moved with practiced rhythm. Feeding, brushing, wrapping, cleaning. She wasn't just caring for him. He was saving her right back. One afternoon, Jessie found her sitting in the grass while Chance grazed nearby. The stallion lifted his head now and then, glancing toward her like a nervous dog checking for reassurance. Claire stood by the edge of the pasture, elbows resting on the fence rail, watching as Chance moved through the tall grass. The sun was low, just touching the tips of the trees with a warm, golden fire. The shadows stretched long across the field, bending with the quiet sway of the breeze. Chance's coat, once dull and ragged, now shimmered faintly in the waning light. The limp was still there, but it no longer defined him. He stepped carefully but with growing confidence, nose to the wind, tail flicking at invisible flies. Each step was deliberate, an act of quiet rebellion against everything that had once tried to end him. Claire didn't speak. She barely breathed. It had been 3 days since the rodeo, and the weight of it still pressed gently around her heart, not in pain, but in awe. The applause, the nods of strangers, the kind words from people who remembered what Chance had been before. They echoed like a melody she wasn't used to hearing. Gratitude. Recognition. It wasn't what she'd done it for. But it mattered more than she expected. Behind her, the barn door creaked open. Jesse emerged, his boots scuffing across the dirt. "He's looking stronger," he said, voice quiet as if afraid to shatter the peace. Claire nodded. "He is." They watched together in silence for a moment. "You think you'll keep him?" Jesse asked, not as a challenge but out of real curiosity. Claire didn't answer right away. She leaned her chin against her arm and followed Chance's slow steps. "I thought I was saving him. But he saved me, Jesse. I didn't even know how lost I was." Jesse's gaze drifted to the field. "We all get lost sometimes. Some folks stay that way. Some don't." Claire turned to him. "You could have stayed gone. You didn't." "I was tired of watching good things die," he said. "Figured I had one more fight left in me." Her voice softened. "Thank you for helping me fight." Jesse shrugged, uncomfortable with sentiment, but his eyes were kind. "You did the hard part." A few minutes passed. The air thickened with the scent of evening, sweet hay, warm dust, and the faint musk of horses. Cicadas buzzed in the hedges. Chance bent to nibble at a clump of clover. "You ever think about starting over?" Claire asked. Jesse raised an eyebrow. "Define starting over." "I mean, what if this wasn't just a one-time rescue? What if we fixed up the barn? Took in more like him? Quiet ones? Broken ones?" He stared at her for a long moment. "You've got no money. I've got time. I've got hands. And I've got him. You think that's enough?" She smiled. It was enough for Chance. Jesse exhaled a breath that was almost a laugh. "You don't quit, do you?" "No," she said. "Not anymore." He looked back at the barn, eyes scanning the sagging roof, the crooked posts, the cracked paint. "You'd need repairs. Fencing. Feed. I've already started a list. Martha said she might help find donations. Del said he knows a guy who does roofing on the cheap." Jesse shook his head in disbelief. "And you just believe this can work?" "I have to," Claire said. "It's the only thing that makes sense anymore." Chance turned his head then, ears perked toward them, like he knew they were talking about him. He gave a low, satisfied whinny and trotted, just a few stiff, beautiful strides, closer to the fence. Claire reached out and stroked the soft space between his eyes. "Hey, beautiful boy." Jesse crossed his arms. "You get that roof fixed, and I'll rebuild your round pen. No charge." Claire turned to him. "Really? Someone's got to make sure you don't kill yourself trying." A smile broke over her face, sudden and bright. Deal. In the days that followed, the property slowly began to transform. The barn roof, once patched with tarps and prayers, was replaced shingle by shingle. Volunteers showed up, some strangers, some familiar faces from town. Martha delivered sacks of feed with a note tucked into the twine, for the ones who got overlooked. Del hauled a water trough in the back of his rusted pickup, muttering the whole time but staying to install it anyway. Even the teenage boy from the auction yard showed up one Saturday morning with a shovel and no explanation. Word spread. They called it Claire's Second Chance Ranch, though she never officially named it. The name stuck anyway. People liked the poetry of it. One broken girl, one dying horse, and a place where things could be whole again. Claire didn't care about the name. She cared about the way Chance greeted her at the fence every morning, eyes bright, posture proud. She cared about the way Jessie stuck around, fixing things quietly, making sure she ate, checking the ledgers she scribbled in a spiral notebook at night. They didn't talk about what they were building. They just built. One morning, Claire found a note pinned to the barn door. Heard you take in the ones nobody wants. I've got a mare, blind in one eye, good heart. Let me know if you've got room. It wasn't signed. Claire held the paper in shaking hands, heart full. When she read it aloud, Jessie just grunted. You gonna say yes? She looked at Chance, who stood beside her, head turned slightly like he was listening. Yes, she said. Always. The mare came a few days later, nervous, skittish, scarred across her flank. Claire named her Hope. She was followed by a retired trail horse with a bowed tendon, then a half-wild pony who refused to be touched but loved to sing at dawn. Each horse brought its own kind of healing. Each taught Claire a little more about grace. Some days were still hard. Funding was thin. Repairs were constant. There were vet bills and setbacks and long nights with little sleep. But there was joy, too. Real joy. The kind that came in quiet moments, a soft muzzle against her palm, a flick of a tail, a horse learning to trust again. One evening, as the sky turned the color of fire and Chance stood watching the horizon like he remembered another life, Claire sat beside Jessie on the old bench they'd dragged out near the barn. You ever think about that day at the auction? She asked. He nodded. Every time I see him run. Would you have done it? If you were me? No, Jessie admitted. I would have walked away. Called it a mercy. Claire looked at him. So why'd you help me? Because you didn't walk away. And I hadn't seen anyone stand up like that in a long time. Claire was quiet for a moment. Then, he taught me how to stay. Jessie nodded slowly. Sometimes, that's the hardest thing. The stars began to appear, blinking into the darkening sky one by one. The wind picked up, carrying the low sounds of horses settling in for the night. Somewhere inside the barn, Hope whickered softly. Claire leaned her head on Jessie's shoulder. He didn't pull away. I think this place is going to matter, she whispered. It already does. They sat there until the moon rose high, casting silver light over the pasture. The next morning, Claire rose early. She fed the horses, checked the water lines, mended a fence post that had split. She moved with the ease of someone who had found a rhythm, a purpose. When she opened the pasture gate, the horses filed out one by one, Chance at the front, as always. He moved like he belonged to the world again. A truck pulled up around mid-morning. A young woman stepped out, her arm around a lanky boy, maybe 12 years old, who clutched a small notebook. The woman smiled nervously. We heard about your place. My son, he's got a gelding. Older. Can't be ridden anymore, but... Claire smiled. We've got space. The boy beamed. His name's Thunder. He's slow, but he likes company. Claire crouched to the boy's level. Then he'll fit right in. As the trailer pulled in and the new horse stepped onto Claire's soil, Chance stood nearby, watching. Not with suspicion but something else. Recognition. He knew. Another one saved. Claire stood at the center of it all, wind tugging at her shirt, eyes bright, hands steady. This was not the life she'd imagined. It was better. In the weeks that followed, the story of Claire and Chance spread beyond the county line. A reporter came, quiet and respectful, taking notes beneath the old oak tree while Chance grazed nearby. Donations trickled in, then poured. Volunteers came not just to help, but to heal. The ranch became a haven, for horses, for people, for anyone who had ever been left behind. And through it all, Chance remained. Older now, a little slower, but still the heart of it. He became a symbol, not because he was perfect, but because he had once been broken, and chose every day to keep going. One spring morning, years later, Claire stood beside him at the top of the pasture. A new foal lay curled in the grass nearby, Hope watching protectively. Claire rubbed Chance's withers and whispered, "We did okay, didn't we?" He turned his head, pressed his nose to her chest, and breathed out slow and steady. Not a word. But then again, he didn't need one.